Welcome to the stage our host, founder of BuzzFeed India, Rega Jha.
Hi. Good morning. Can you all hear me? Welcome to the final day of Women Deliver 2019. For the next hour, we're going to be thinking about youth. So to start with, anyone here under the age of 30 make some sort of sound? Amazing. I think I saw a dab somewhere, which is exactly the spirit of this hour. So that noise was loud. It's because half of the world's population is under the age of 30 today. That is 3.5 billion people around the world who are youths. All the work that we've done this week, all the work that we will continue to do as we head home is in service of creating a world where all of those 3.5 billion people have the power to reach their full potential. But being young feminists isn't easy. We grow up around oppressive structures like exclusionary capitalism, racism, patriarchy. Those structures are working overtime to recruit us as their foot soldiers. But we resisted, we're here. And we're also held back from power by our own minds, by imposter syndrome, by anxiety, by our stupid Instagram addictions. And we're left out of rooms where power is negotiated. This is not one of those rooms. Today, for the next hour, I'm going to be speaking with activists from around the world who have taken on personal labor, personal trauma, and personal risk to break their way into rooms where power is negotiated and to throw the rooms of those doors open to let people in who aren't let in already. So let me introduce my first guest. Her name is Cleo Kambugu. She's a Ugandan advocate for the rights of transgender people. As Cleo claimed her power and identity as a woman, she risked a lot. She put a lot on the line. She had to leave her parents' home. She even had to flee her country of Uganda for her own safety. Her advocacy work includes starring in an award-winning documentary called The Pearl of Africa. She also helped form the International Trans Fund, the Pan-African Advocacy Program, and she advises multiple organizations on grant work, on research, on more. Right now, she works with an organization called Uhai Ishri, which was pivotal in overturning the homosexuality bill in Uganda. So please, welcome on stage, Cleo. Hi, Cleo.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. It's been an amazing week.
Yeah, neither of us are nervous at all, by the way. Don't worry about it. The stage is tiny. We're not stressing. Cleo, I want to get right to it because we don't have a lot of time and I have a billion things I want to talk to you about. To begin with, there's something I've noticed back home among advocates, activists, which is often the injustices that we're fighting in the world are the same injustices that have really traumatized us and hurt us privately. And we are simultaneously trying to process that public work with our private pain. And this is something I believe you've done with incredible grace and with incredible strength. So what's your advice to young people around the world who are navigating these dual processes at the same time?
That's an interesting question because my public advocacy was actually born from a success of being able to change how my parents and siblings and people I went to school with and went to church with looked at me. I come from a family of 12 and 5 mothers. It was a huge family. And coming out as a transgender woman in Uganda for me meant a decision of either to leave home and do it elsewhere or actually do it from home. And it was also an appreciation of it's taken me 15 years to transition. And it will take my parents and siblings and sisters and my friends time to transition as well. So for me, it was staying there. It has an implication on my security. It had an implication on my security, but it was staying there and living through it all and changing how they think and look at me and how they think and look at gender and expanding that whole concept in their heads. And for me, that success with my family, with my friends, then meant that I think I should do this on a huger level, and I think if more people are able to change those small spaces that they exist in, then change can really start happening because your world is really that space that you exist in. Your neighbor, the person where you buy your groceries from,
Yes.
your
yes,
teacher.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for me, that was my impetus.
That's beautiful. And a concept that you just spelled out that I really love is that when one young person is claiming their identity and is claiming their power, that all of their loved ones, their caregivers, also go through a transition process with them of now reckoning with this loved one being different or being vulnerable in public. And what's your advice for those caregivers?
And my mom went through that. My mom one time mentioned that I feel like I've lost my son. And she said the difference between losing a person, when they die, is you stop seeing them. But I lost you and I still see you. But I see some other person wearing your body. And it's disturbing. And my dad dealt with having to deal with his peers and his friends who were questioning his success at parenting. And so for me, it was standing in that space and being present and knowing that his transitioning is dealing with this stigma that he has never had to deal with. And it was a difficult time with him sometimes being irrational and pushing back at me, but me appreciating that it was coming from a place where he had been introduced to a new stigma that he had never had to deal with as a cisgender heterosexual man, that questioned his success at parenting, that questioned everything about himself and his status in his village where we live right now. And so I think even right now when I go to my activism and I speak, because that work had been done of helping them understand and appreciate what I do and why I exist, not only do they have the language to challenge this new stigma, but even in spaces I'm not, and this is interesting because you'll find them on Facebook going at it about transgender 101. Like if you ever attack me like on social media, it wouldn't be me going at it, it'd be my sisters, and we're like 12 of them, and then my mom and dad, and we're a huge family, and of recent it's like maybe like 3 years ago, it's my extended family, because we have very close extended families in Africa, particularly mine, so we're like maybe 150. So if you went at me about being transgender, you have like 150 people besides myself going at you. And I'm just imagining and I'm thinking that spaces where they do exist and how they're raising their children differently, and the institutions where they wield power, how they're able to effect change in these other places. So for me, beyond them being able to be strong as caregivers, is how are they able to effect change as satellites of change in other spaces they exist.
And something so beautiful that I'm hearing from you is that you, despite going through this difficult, phase yourself, were extending empathy back to them, knowing that this is, a specific process and a difficult process for them too. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I won't say that my situation is relatable, and my parents are not another trans parents. And the thing with coming out to your loved ones is you basically, someone explained as having to go through the grievance curve, and you could react in a myriad of ways, and that might mean insecurity for that person who is trans in that kind of dynamic. And so however people decide to navigate this is valid. That was my experience. It's completely not related to another trans person's experience, but
Cleo, we don't have a lot of time left, sadly, already. So I'm going to ask you a question that I really want to ask every young advocate I ever meet, which is, when we start our public advocacy young, it means that before we're fully done learning things, before we're fully formed in our politics, we're already speaking out in the world. And we mess up. We make mistakes out in front of everyone. And that's a beautiful thing. I want to know, what's a mistake you've made that you learned a lot from in your advocacy work?
Well, as a feminist, one of the principles that at the core of my values is listening as a political act and believing that I will make mistakes, and that's fine, because I'm human. And I've made mistakes, and for me, it has been what has been my reaction. Part of the mistakes I've made is because I'm a loud person.
I don't think that's
and
a mistake.
I don't think I should blame myself for that.
At all.
But yeah, I guess I've challenged my government in certain spaces and I've felt the wrath of them. But I've also challenged my government in spaces where I've pushed them to change my name and gender on my legal documents, and they had never done this. And I challenged myself, to produce the Pearl of Africa at a time when we had the Anti-Homosexuality Act, where you couldn't have a conversation about sexuality. And when I left Uganda because of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, I either had a decision to retreat and just do nothing, and that's valid, or do something back. And at that moment, for me, my reaction was, I have to fight this. So I joined Uhai Ishi, the fund that I work with in East Africa that works in 7 countries. And the first thing they supported in the first 3 months was they made a grant. We made a grant that actually I made because I was a grant officer at that moment. That actually meant that the Anti-Homosexuality Act was repealed. 3 months.
Oh, wow.
And so 3 months into my work. And so for me, it's how do you push back at things when they come at you? And sometimes it might have an adverse reaction, like it does. But also, how do you learn from these things?
Yeah. And a final question, Cleo, is feminist spaces like this one, mainstream feminist spaces, are often accused of not being very welcoming to trans women.
Yeah.
Is that something you felt? And what work would you say we all have left to do?
I think there's nothing wrong with feminists. It's how people practice their feminism. And what Women Deliver has done this time around and the past editions of creating spaces like this, it's revolutionary for a trans woman to exist. It's revolutionary that I'm standing in this place and I'm speaking at a Women Deliver plenary, because this has been a traditionally cis women's space. And so what I would like to push for spaces like, Women Deliver and, the UN Women is to expand, is to really practice feminism as it should be, to go back to where feminism was and ask themselves, is it valid, is it right to deny space for trans women to exist in such spaces? And what I would like to push Women Deliver to do next time is to even have more trans people coming to this space. What I would like to push the UN Women is to even push more trans people to come for the UN Women spaces. And beyond allowing these women, and I say women because trans women are women, the reason why they should be, how they can be supported to be in these spaces is not just being in the room, but actually sitting at the table and being a part of key conversations, including the ones that inform how these spaces end up being curated. Because then you would really see how it opens up in terms of diversity and inclusivity, which is feminism, which is what we all stand for here.
Absolutely. Cleo, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being here. This was lovely. I'm going to find you to talk for hours after, because 10 minutes is not enough. Thank you, Cleo. We're going to switch over a little from talking about private processes of claiming power to institutional power for youth. Our next guest is Aya Chebbi. Aya began claiming her power as an anti-fascism writer in Tunisia during the Revolution of Dignity, or what a lot of us heard of called the Arab Spring. She attended protests. She ran a blog called Proudly Tunisian, which went globally viral. Today, she's the first African Union youth envoy. Her full-time job is to build bridges between young people and power. And we're going to hear about how we can all be doing that. Aya, welcome on stage. How's it going?
Going well.
How
Hello,
are
Women
you feeling?
Deliver!
Aya, like I just said, something you do full-time is something all of us need to go back to our home countries and learn how to do better, which is harnessing the power of young people and building bridges between young people's energy and institutions that have institutional power. What's your advice? How do we do it?
I think what I learned as an activist is not to just occupy the square, but to occupy leadership positions that we deserve. If we don't like the system, we need to also be in the system to change it.
Exactly.
And to dismantle it. And I think being in Tunisia's revolution as a protester, a blogger, an organizer, a boycotter, I led the Pan-African movement for 8 years. And now being in the African Union as a youth envoy, I am more convinced that we need more activists, more champions, more voices in the system that we're trying to challenge. Especially in Africa, because we have a key demographic. We're not only the youngest continent in the world, but also the average age of African leadership is 66 years old, and the average age of the population is 25. So we have at least 40 years of intergenerational gap in leadership. And so we need more young people to be in leadership, but also we need intergenerational dialogue. Not to focus on passing the torch to us as the next generation, but to focus on co-leadership, leading now. And that could be, just like the plenary we had the first day, to happen at the national level, at the township, the village level, but also to have young ministers like the Minister of Botswana of Trade Investment, to have young public servants like Rose Washuka, who was the youngest in the Supreme Court, who shaped the Constitution in 2010, to have bills like Not Too Young to Run in Nigeria, who can make you run for president at 35, run for parliament at 25. So that's intergenerational co-leadership. It's not having youth advisors to the president, because the president might not even meet them, and if he does, he would advise them, rather than advising them.
The anti-advisors in that situation, Aya, when it comes to young people in power, there's this word that I've read in your writing. And I don't want to try to explain it because I'll butcher it, but I do think it's a useful word for the whole world to know about. It's hogra. Am I saying it right? Hogra?
Yeah.
Can you please tell us what it means to you, and why we should all really take this word home with us?
I think that all of us are angry because of the messed up world we live in. Yes. And some of us choose to use the anger or translate it into positive energy. And other people with the same intention choose violence. And I came to that realization when my cousin was radicalized by Daesh in 2013. He was 22 years old. He just graduated from university. He was an engineer. He was educated and had opportunity to have a job. We managed to de-radicalize him. He's now engaged, and he started a gym project in our village.
Amazing.
But yes, but that was a tough experience to go through as a family, and it made me question, why is that young people like my cousin join violent groups, and people like me join nonviolent social justice movements? Yeah. And we come from the same environment.
It's the same emotion,
exactly.
driving both of those.
Exactly. Yeah. And that pushed me to do my thesis on youth radicalization, a comparison between Daesh recruitment in Tunisia, Al-Shabaab recruitment in Kenya. And I explained the whole thesis in Hogra, which is a word we use in the Maghreb region, meaning that all those who have power and money got that by crushing the most vulnerable. And that's how young people feel today.
Can you imagine that whole concept is in 2 syllables? Hogra? Hogra?
Hogra.
We all need to know this word.
Yeah, I think the point from Hogra is to explain that it's not education or the status of an employment that leads youth to radicalization, but it's the perception of injustice, the perception of marginalization. When injustice is perceived, young people see these violent groups not as perpetrators of violence, but as legitimate fighters against the status quo, against the perceived corrupt political systems. Yeah. And so in order to fight that, again, I think that's why intergenerational co-leadership is important, because there is a crisis of trust and legitimacy of the government. Yeah. And the delegitimization of our leadership legitimized violent extremism. It was a tough experience, and I got really angry what happened to my cousin, what happened to thousands of young Tunisians, thousands of young Africans, but I chose not to fight back. I chose to create Pan-African, transnational spaces of belonging that are nonviolent, that are inclusive and empowering. And I think we need to move also away from fighting back and start building.
Yeah, and the concept there, totally. The concept there is that when a young person feels disempowered, all they're looking for is some space to go to.
Absolutely.
That will give them power. And that can be a social justice movement, or it can be a radical hate
It
group.
is about identity as well,
Yeah,
because young people are looking for something bigger than national identity and the nation state. You know, in the 60s and 50s in Africa, our liberation movements built nation states with borders. And now we talk about borderless Africa. We talk about e-governance. We talk about e-citizenship. We migrated online because there is no borders online. You know, because our world has a lot of borders that we cannot see each other and collaborate with each other. So I think that's the word we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about a particular type of hate group that a lot of young people are rallying into nowadays, and it's, you know, threatening a lot of women, which is authoritarianism, racism, the right, and really that, you know, that's a side of power that's coming into so much noise in the world right now, and it's not good for women. And you've spent a lot of time in both anti-dictator movements and in gender rights movements. And I strongly believe these are movements that need to be working together. They're fighting against the same enemy. Do you see those links being formed out there?
I think not just feminist movements or youth movements and, you know, the dichotomy between them, but also the indigenous movement, the climate movement, all movements. I think if we really want to win the battles we're fighting for, we need to understand and act on the intersectionality of our struggles and have intersectional action. But to answer your questions on the front line, the people on the front line, I think an example of that is what has been happening in Sudan. And I really want to send a message of solidarity to Sudanese youth, because Sudanese youth are also African youth, and African youth are also human beings, and their lives matter. And I know in this part of the world, you know, conversations, media get attention to Africa of war, the Africa of disease, the Africa of hunger, but not the Africa where young people have been leading change for the past decade. And no one is talking about it. So if we want to talk about the power of now is in Africa and is where women and young Sudanese women have led a peaceful revolution. But they were excluded from the negotiation table, and they have been raped now as we speak. So what is happening in Sudan right now is a massacre and is unacceptable, and the violence must stop. The African Union condemned what's going on, and as the youth envoy, I stand with the Sudanese youth who are unarmed and who deserve democratic transition, who deserve accountability, and who deserve justice. So no to militarization. No to militarization, and yes to civilian-led governments in Africa. And also enough with democratic transitions where women and youth are not on the table.
You're so good. Aya, a last question. As young feminists, we are obviously grateful to the feminists before us who have created this movement, brought us all together. It isn't perfect. We'll do the work of expanding it, strengthening it. But there has been a lot of work done before we even got to this stage. I want to keep those links alive. You talked about intergenerational work. And I think young feminists can't afford to forget all the work that's been done before us. If there is one feminist from a generation before us whose work or whose life you want every young woman in the world to get acquainted with, who would that be?
There are many. I would say Nawal Saadawi, an Egyptian feminist radical of her time. She had 8 decades of activism, and I think as an activist, when you also get exhausted and you feel alone, and you just want to be on an island chilling, you look up to women like her and you continue the struggle. And she put to light issues of female genital mutilation, of sexuality at a time where it was impossible to talk about. But she also has this, my favorite feminist quote.
Okay.
So when her haters told her, you are a dangerous and savage woman, she answered them, I am telling the truth. And the truth is dangerous and savage. And I think we should be reminded every day how savage and dangerous patriarchal systems are, so we can act with the urgency we need to end it and have gender equality.
Absolutely. Aya, thank you so much.
And the future is female.
Thank you, Aya.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to 8 more decades of Aya's activism. I'm going to welcome my next guest on stage, June Eric-Odori. June is a writer and one of the most powerful and rousing writers I've personally read in a very long time. She's written for The Guardian, The New Statesman, for Cosmo, and she has an essay anthology out that she curated, she edited. It's called Can We All Be Feminists? And I really encourage everyone to go out and get it because it's a series of essays by young women who have felt left out by feminism and who make a demand that feminism become more intersectional. When June isn't accepting awards and being put on young leader lists, she's also a college student and she's 20 years old. June, welcome onto stage. Hi. How's it going?
Good.
June, so like you're 20.
I am 21 in a couple of
It's
weeks.
cool, it's a little annoying, like no big deal. Are you, when people like me, old fogies, 27-year-olds like me, aren't marveling at you, are you aware of being very young? Is that?
I always tell people, if you think about my day-to-day, it's rolling out of bed at 8 a.m. and running to class, right? So am I aware of my age? No. I don't think age matters, right? I've been doing activism since I was 12. I stood up in front of my class when they kept talking about Africa in really dumb ways. And I went to the head of my department and I said, I would like to do a presentation to the entire school about Africa. And she was like, okay, you go. And I did it several times. It was called Africa is Not a Country. And that was one of my earliest, moments of activism. I've been working on that ever since.
Oh, wow. That's incredible, June. And when you're in feminist spaces, and we're among, like Aya just talked about someone who did 8 decades of advocacy, and we're actually around people in this building who've been at it for decades and decades. And these different generations of feminism have had different battles. We've had different fights. We've sort of, paved the way for everyone who comes after us. As a younger feminist, as a baby in mainstream feminism spaces, what do you think our role is? What do you think our role is for these spaces?
I think what is really interesting and what is really powerful about this generation of women is that we're really not taking no for an answer, right? We're asking and we're demanding that women have access to abortion. We're demanding that trans women are treated like people. We're saying Black Lives Matter. We're talking about the ways in which women are dying in maternal mortality in the United States and across the world, right? We're pushing forward this brand of feminism that is intersectional. And it's not intersectional in the way that the word has become popularized, but really when you think about what Kimberly Crenshaw was talking about when she wrote that article back in the 90s, she was saying, let's look at the way in which race and gender and all of these things combine to make the lives of Black women, trans women, queer women, disabled women, women who are across those boundaries harder. And let's make sure that we have policies and systems that do not render them invisible, right? And so what I think is powerful about even the young women who've come up here is that they're saying, we're not going to be limited by normative forms of gender. We're not going to be limited by heterosexuality and heteronormativity. We're going to push back against these norms, and we're going to fight for a space for all women, whether they're trans, queer, disabled, non-binary, however they identify, however they work in this world. They deserve to be seen, and they deserve to be protected.
There's one thing that I feel young feminists online have done, which I'm just thrilled about, which is we've embraced growth culture. We've embraced saying, we're all growing, we're all learning, we're all getting better. I have not been right all the time. Don't look up my tweets from 3 years ago. And I'm sorry about that, and I'm changing. And growth culture applies to the movement as a whole. We're all growing together, and also to us as individuals. And I want to know, what are some types of growth that you found exciting, either for the movement or yourself as a person, as a feminist yourself?
Yeah, so one of the things I talk about a lot is I worked on a collection of essays that came out last year called, Can We All Be Feminists? Kind of playing a little bit with Chimamanda saying, we should all be feminists. I'm like, should we? I mean, we should, but do you want to be part of a movement that asks you to leave half of yourself at the door, right? I don't want to have to think about in 10 years which part of me is free. My womanhood is free, so therefore, but what about my blackness? What about my queerness? What about the fact that I'm disabled, right? I shouldn't have to, worry about which part of me is free, and I shouldn't have to get to a door and leave the fact that I am black and queer at the door to make you more comfortable, right? And so I think that's really powerful. And one of the things I've learned is just because I'm a black, queer, disabled woman doesn't mean that I know everything. From editing that anthology, I learned a lot about my own blind spots. And so what I continue to encourage other women is like, this is not a competition, right? Mm-hmm. This is not who can win the race the quickest, right? This is really work that is personal and political. And that's something that feminists have been saying a long time. But I really want to push you to think about all the time, who isn't there when you walk into a space? Why aren't they there? How can we get them there? Or if we can't, right, how can we go and meet them where they are, right? So I encourage us to just think beyond always working on online spaces, because there are many people who don't have access to the internet. I have a close friend of mine who's from New Mexico, and she is part of a community that has been abandoned by the US government, where she grew up having to use with buckets in America, right? And so her community, her family are the ones who've had to, build electricity in their neighborhood, right? Some people might not access the internet because they don't understand how it works, whether that's because it's inaccessible, because they're disabled. I can find it hard sometimes being on the internet, being a partially blind woman, so we need to make sure that all the time we're doing that personal work of thinking, how can I be better? What mistakes have I had? That you're not turning to the people who have been oppressed and asking them to fix your problems, because guess what? I didn't make racism, okay? And so don't ask me how to fix a problem that I didn't cause. You sit down and you think, and you come to us and you allow us to be the representatives of ourselves. You allow us to use our voices, unless we tell you that we can't speak for ourselves because it's too difficult or it's too dangerous, right? So you do that coalition work, that really being an ally. A lot of us think we are allies, and you are not. You're not an ally, right? And so doing that hard work, putting yourself on the line. White women, turn up to those Black Lives Matter movements, because guess what? They're not going to shoot you, okay? But they will shoot us if we're there. And so do that work of putting your body on the line. Do that work of reaching out to those communities that are hard to reach and asking them what they need. Do that work of making yourself uncomfortable. And when you read my book, don't message me on Instagram saying, oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable. Because that's what that book is meant to make you feel. It's meant to make you examine your prejudices. It's meant to make you examine your privileges. And it's meant to make you push you to want to be better.
I'm just going to unsend that DM then. Sorry. June, a last question. You've talked about unlearning, about growing, about changing. As we learn feminism, there's a corollary to that, which is we are unlearning patriarchy within ourselves. Patriarchy has its claws in us so deep, they feel like bones sometimes. And that's, it's a lot of labor to unlearn it. I know for myself, whether it's unlearning demureness or unlearning beauty or unlearning scripts of romance and like chasing boys who are not good for me. There's a lot of work to do to just get rid of patriarchy in ourselves. What's been the deepest claw in you that you've had to extract?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me was having to accept that I was queer and I do not care for boys. Not interested, don't like you, don't text me, don't call me, don't nothing.
This is a PSA.
And I think that was hard because I grew up in a very, very heteronormative society. I was always a child who was annoying. My mom would say, oh, is this what you do in your husband's house? And I'd say, well, why can't it be my house? Excuse me? And they would say, you have to get up. I remember my dad said, clean the table. And I said, why? And he said, because you're a girl. And I said, no, absolutely. That's not how it works, Dad. And he cleaned that table himself, okay? So I've always been rebellious. I have always been difficult. I've always been looking at the ways in which women move in the world and saying, I don't want to do that, right? I don't want to be like that. But the hardest thing for me has been able to accept that, like, love is love. And growing up in a very Christian, evangelical society where every day you're being told you'll go to hell, it can be hard to come out and say, actually, I'm a Black lesbian, and I don't care, and I'm not interested in following that tradition. And, it has cost me my family, but I think it's more important that I I am who I am, and that I take pride in that, and I don't live a world where I'm trying to be something else so that other people are happy, right? It's about making sure that I'm happy in what I do, in my values, in the things that in my values, in my work, in my personal life, because life is short, right? And there's no point trying to please other people. And I think that's the biggest thing I've had to learn with patriarchy is, like, I don't have to do this because it makes you feel comfortable. I don't have to abide to these norms. I can go out and be the first black female president, the first black, whatever it is that I want to do, I'm going to do it, right? And you're not I've had to deal with people growing up in an evangelical, very Christian family who've told me you can't do this. And I've said no to them, so you're not the one who's going to stop me, right? Because that was a hard one. So now it's only the skies right now. So thank you,
June. That is fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for chatting with me.
Thank you for
That's
having
all
me.
we have time for. Though I want to talk to you also for us. 20. Oh. But also it means we have her for decades also, which is exciting. My last guest that I'm going to be speaking with today is Alencia Johnson. Alencia has a very easy job nowadays. She hasn't been busy at all. She's the Director of Public Engagement at Planned Parenthood America. Alencia's priority at Planned Parenthood has been, aside from saving the world, fighting fascism, all of that, her priority has been making reproductive health an inclusive conversation, one that folds in people of color, people who are queer, as key stakeholders, not just afterthoughts. She's been featured on Ebony Magazine's Power 100 list, PR Week's 40 Under 40 list, and she really spends a lot of time going on TV and on print to really save the world from fascists. Please welcome Alencia Johnson.
Busy for us.
Yeah,
in the United
couple
States.
of things going on.
Just a few things.
So Alencia, you've been working really hard, so I'm going to give you a break, start easy. How do we fix fascism and the fact that it wants all women to go back to being mothers and wives?
You wear nice red lipstick first.
Done.
Oh my goodness. I think for me, I think about the lessons that my grandmother taught me before she passed, a woman from southern United States in Virginia, and she was just telling me before she died, it was 2014, and I thought we had seen the worst of it. And she was kind of crying to me in that I thought I had fought for everything, so you didn't have to. I thought that I pushed for Roe v. Wade to become, law of the land. I fought for civil rights, for voting rights, all these things, and I just did that because I didn't want you to do that. But it didn't necessarily put me down. It actually encouraged me that I was being passed this torch for even more people in a more inclusive way. And I feel as though what I've seen since the uprise, particularly around the world, that president that I don't like to mention that we have right now, when he was elected, I think folks were really surprised and upset, but then you saw this women's movement that came together globally, right? Globally, people saw that what's happening in the United States has an impact on all of us, and so we're all going to rise together in a way that we haven't seen before. We had trans women on the front lines with us. We were including women of color in the center of this conversation, and previous feminist movements hadn't been that way, and so I'm kind of encouraged. I don't think we're going to, of course, solve all of the issues within the next few years, but it is encouraging that we are all collectively doing this together in the spirit of our ancestors, and for me, particularly the black women that I stand on the shoulders of.
Absolutely. And we are getting stronger as we get more inclusive because, especially when it comes to fascism and reproductive rights and that link, I think what we're up against is a politic of othering. And so if we fight them with being inclusive, I think that's our best bet at winning. And that's work that you're really actively engaged in, is in expanding this conversation to include other folks. And can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I started at Planned Parenthood, I actually, truth be told, when they approached me for the job about over 6 years ago, I wasn't super excited about it in the way that most people would have thought that I was, especially now, the work that I've been doing, because there's this perception around feminism and women's rights that it doesn't include black women, it doesn't include Christian women, it doesn't include LGBTQ folks, it doesn't include anyone that's not a white woman. And so I saw it as an opportunity to be bold within who I am. I have grown up unapologetically black, I can't escape it, and I lean into it. But when I got to the organization and saw that there was so much opportunity to show the links between racial justice, police brutality, immigration, all these others that are actually centered in agency, how do we actually have this conversation and change the perception? And so I was fortunate enough to start a department that really centers young people, LGBTQ folks,
fantastic.
people of faith, and I'm a person of faith. I want to reimagine how this conversation of religion is actually, for me, progressive, and not be co-opted on the right that it has been. And that it's actually causing harm when we don't have the right frame of religion. And so how are we bringing all of these issues into the, not just the national discourse in the United States, but the global discourse of reproductive rights, and changing the perception of that reproductive health care isn't just an issue for white women. It's actually for all of us. And quite frankly, those of us on the margins are dying when our access is taken away.
Absolutely. And Alencia, you do this work, centrally through your prowess of communications. You're a storyteller, and the power that you use to make these changes is storytelling. All of us, we might not all be storytelling professionals, but we do have Instagram and we do have Twitter, and we are like severely addicted to those tools. And we are constantly telling the stories of our own lives. And I just want to know, just something actionable for us to take home, even in our private advocacy, in our private storytelling of our lives. How can we be using each thing we say about ourselves to move towards that better, more inclusive world?
Well, because we're so connected. I think June said it before, like the personal is political. And you'll see, particularly in the United States, when we have all of these conversations about abortion bans, we are pushing forward people to share their own story, because people, someone who's had an abortion, someone who's
100%.
LGBTQIA, someone who is dealing with the immigration fight, someone that is impacted by all of these issues. And when you're able to break down that barrier of saying that it's actually not that far away from you, it's someone that it might be your family, and it might actually be someone that you're sitting with at Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever it may be that you celebrate. It's a really powerful tool that storytelling can be shared that way. And so I encourage people to do it in a way that's safe, because it is very dangerous for folks who are vulnerable to share their experiences sometimes, especially when, on one hand, freedom of speech is so beautiful in that we can talk about who we are. On the other hand, it does allow for some hate that actually puts
we can
people
be
in harm's
punished
way.
for it.
Absolutely. And so I also think about the work that I do in the entertainment industry. Majority of storylines that we see, particularly in TV and film around abortions, are wealthy white women, and that's not the reality of the people who are having abortions. And no matter those stories and how diverse they are, it's so powerful when people who have the tools to tell stories on a massive scale do it in a very real and authentic way. And that only comes with those of us having these experiences, share those experiences in our own lives.
Absolutely. Something I think a lot about storytelling is it's been used as this tool to actually keep women at a distance from our own bodies. All the bodies that we see in popular culture don't look like our own, and you just look down at yourself and you're like, I'm wrong, this is not. And then you look at your life experiences and you say, oh, I'm going through an abortion, and no one who looks like me ever has in the history of the world, it feels like.
Well, that's why representation matters, and I think the thread through with all of my experience, people are like, how did you go from corporate America to politics to advocacy? It's literally about representation.
Oh, there was a casual stop at the Obama re-election campaign.
Just
also,
the
right?
casual
Just
stop
one
in
stop
2012.
over.
Well, one thing I really learned there is that it's not necessarily the message, it's the messenger. You could have the same person, you could have the same message told by several different people of different backgrounds and identities, and people are going to connect with that in a different way. And oftentimes people of privilege want to be the ones being the center of attention and telling the message. But quite frankly, folks aren't going to connect there. And so the representation is so important. And I'm so grateful that the entertainment industry in the United States is really pushing this representation piece, not just on screen, but who's writing these stories. I'm sure you know this in the newsroom. Who's writing the story matters, because, again, it's the messenger. And your vantage point is going to be completely different than someone without your experience.
Absolutely. Alencia, this fight that you're fighting for reproductive health and rights against a far-right leadership, America has gotten a lot of attention around the world when it's happening there, but it's also happening in basically, many, many countries right now. There are women around the world fighting that same fight. Planned Parenthood feels like it's on the front lines. This is a war that's waging globally, and it feels like you are one sort of battle leader. Give us battle advice, man.
Oh, man.
What do we do?
The first thing I would say, honestly, don't give up. because it is something that we're going to unfortunately be fighting our whole lives. But I do have hope, back to what we were talking about earlier, and that more people are dedicated to this fight. I think one of the most interesting things is people are like, how are you Christian from the South and you do this abortion work? And I said, because I believe that Jesus was a radical black feminist who was targeted by the states. I mean, literally, the earliest...
Where can I buy that T-shirt? I just need it right now.
I mean, the earliest form of police brutality was the government killing Jesus, right? And he ministered to sex workers and stuff, and he believed in compassion, and I am rooted in that, and that goes back to me authentically being who I am. And I think that is the strongest battle, the battle tip, is to be who you are and who you are unapologetically, because they can't fight that. You know, they can talking point around me. They can try to, oh, it's really good when I am out speaking. I'm pretty sure someone's going to pick this up, and they call me all these crazy names, especially when they know I'm a Christian and, you know, I'm black. They try to drive, you know, a wedge between black folks and abortion rights, but I actually know the history of that. I actually know the history particularly in the United States, is that these evangelicals were actually against desegregation, and when they realized that was a losing argument, they went over to abortion rights. And when you can challenge people by, one, being authentically who you are and your own experiences, and then also researching what they're using, you can do nothing but win with that.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Alencia. Alencia, thank you. This has been wonderful. Go back, fight that fight. We need you out there. That's all the chats I'm going to have this morning. But before we head out, we're going to have a last performance on stage that I'm so excited for. Danica Thomas is a Women Deliver young leader and an internationally recognized poet, a writer, an arts educator, and of course, an activist. She's from Trinidad and Tobago, and she's the program manager for Girl Be Heard back home. Danica marries her art, her writing, and spoken word with advocacy, mentorship, and activism. Please welcome her and her poetry on stage.
How everybody feeling? Good? All right, so I'm going to dedicate this poem to everyone in the audience. I've struggled to understand our origin. I've spent a lot of time dissecting our form. There must be a formula for being a woman that includes eons of ancestral lineage, an eternal accumulation of magic, the strength and resilience that does not always present itself in muscle. I've stargazed a lot in an attempt to come to terms with questions like, how come the moon and the sun, hoisted in the sky and never touch? What forces causes them to not collide? How did Mother Nature come into existence? Who birthed her? Whose hands were so big to place her crown on her head? Why does the term Big Bang sound so much like a contraction? I've heard stories about being born from rib. I've seen women carry the entire earth on their heads. I've watched my mother's hands create cropped circles in the thick cane field atop my head. I've admired my school teacher's miracle work, how she taught us to be portals and forces to be reckoned with in the breakdown of subject and verb agreement, in the life lessons that later reveal that not all subjects and verb agree, like the subject woman, and the verb success and mobility, and how it always leaves the world on edge, how we've been forced to bend circumstance and use every dark room to develop a picture of ourselves that will not be presented unless we paint and sculpture it on our own. Our paths have been far from perfect. We've been carrying the earth on our backs since the beginning of time, yet all the credit sometimes goes to a man, like the Titan. At last, at least, we are light bearers carrying the suns in our stomachs, scorpion pepper on our tongues, a little bit of bite and growl in our mouths. We've come from so many places. We are so many things. We are all the warmth and nurture, but sometimes we could flip into forest fires, and they'll say that we're hot-tempered for not knowing our place, for being a little bit out of step. We have not have it easy. We exist in a world that doesn't know how to give us credit. We are afraid to be seen as weak because for women, you have to take the back seat. We spend our lives fighting to keep our stuff together because in this world, there is nothing empowering about a woman who breaks down in public. She just looks like she's crazy. I fed up see women struggle to make ends meet, always meeting ends and waving them goodbye because we're supposed to be good at parting ways with the things that we love. Because being woman is supposed to mean being sacrificed. I saw how my mother was a matriarch, a Baptist woman. She was Baptist, who seemed to be more like a Hindu god, Mother Lakshmi, in how many hands she seemed to have, how many hands she used to use to do all the things that seemed impossible. I wonder how she learned to be this strong. Who taught her? Or if it was a manual passed down by her mother. We've evolved from not being celebrated, not being previously able to vote, inherit property, gain equal pay for equal work, to having an entire month dedicated to acknowledging how amazing we are, how we've blazed trails and make flowers bloom in hard-to-grow places like deserts. We've had to remain watered in places that never see rain like deserts. And I know it's not enough, but ain't it amazing that we here at Woman Deliver Conference 2019 doing all the work to advance the rights of women and girls like it's nobody's business? Look how long it has taken us to learn that the strongest beings that exist in the universe is either God or a woman. And most of us know that those two terms can be used interchangeably. Woman, deliver us from darkness, from shame, from discrimination. Woman, deliver us the prayer that we could grow and move forward in this world. Woman, deliver us from the evil that is silence. We've come so far. We've owned everything about ourselves that was not previously accepted. I look at this audience and it has so many beautiful people. It's filled of so many girls and women and LGBT folk and trans and non-binary bodies of men and allies. And the first thing I see is hope, uncaged potential, unlimited magic. Say yes. Say yes. Say yes. If you feel like every woman is an island, we are continents that keep the entire world balanced. So look at all these islands, holding up the world and never dropping it once, balancing our lives in the center of a ring with a competitor that never stopped hitting and never dropping the globe once. We give credit where credit is due. We lift up women who are not as privileged as we are. We continue to tell our stories because that is how we continue to live forever. And I can't call all of us by name, but I thank God for her work in making us as stubborn as she is. For the daughter of the soil, who speak in flowers, who slay, who fight, who love, who suffer, who lose their lives on the battlefield, who are made of stars and planets, who are more than their bodies, who are enough, who sometimes go unnoticed, who remain soft even when we full of rage. This is our origin, and it's hard to dissect our form. God, this must be the formula for being a woman, a mixture of eons of ancestral lineage, an accumulation of magic, a strength and resilience that does not always show itself in muscle. Thank you.
I was snapping aggressively backstage, just like both hands. Thank you all so much. I want to thank Cleo, Aya, June, and Alencia for flying here literally from around the world to share their wisdom and their presence. I also want to thank Women Deliver for allowing young women into these rooms, onto these stages, and encouraging us to throw the doors of these rooms wide open to let in everyone who isn't here yet. Thank you. That's all for the Power of Youth, but please stay in your seats because for the next 10 minutes, we're going to be doing something very special, which is naming the finalists of the Women Deliver Social Enterprise pitches. So stay here and look forward to that. See you all.
We now welcome to the stage our Social Enterprise Challenge finalists.
Welcome, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be the person to announce the winners today of the Social Enterprise Pitch. My name is Miriam Bengoa. I'm the Executive Director of Fondation Chanel, a foundation dedicated to gender equality and women's empowerment around the world. We are very pleased to say that Women Deliver has conducted this social enterprise pitch for the last 3 years. And as we know, Women Deliver is about bringing together lots of different stakeholders, NGOs, businesses, NGOs and governments alike. So here today, we really want to set the focus on this new emerging market of social entrepreneurs who are often very young, very talented, and who need also to find a voice in this global discussion around gender equality. So we produced a global call for submissions. There were over 20 applicants from around the world. 10 candidates came and pitched for the last 2 days in front of an international jury. And we are absolutely delighted to greet the 3 winners of tonight. All 3 of them will be awarded $10,000 and support in technical assistance to grow their business, to develop their ability to raise more funds, and to grow their capacity to vibrantly represent youth entrepreneurs around the world. Why is it important? We've been speaking for the last 3 days about the power of change for gender equality. Business solutions that also have a social impact are at the core of what us philanthropists, what government need to be supporting in the best possible way. We know that women and girls are full of new ideas, that we want to bring solutions that respond to their needs, and for that matter, to bring solutions that are also economically and socially viable is key. So to start off today, we would like to talk about a situation that is found in many urban situations, where we know that finding work or making money sometimes means migrating, seems leaving home, and rural communities with rich cultural traditions are sometimes vulnerable to disappearing. Roots Studio wants to create a new economic opportunity for indigenous artists by connecting them with multi-billion-dollar retail markets in ways that protect their heritage and their safety. This is, for me, the great honor to invite here Rebecca Hui, who is a Brooklyn native and has, over the last 4 years, developed this amazing business in India, China, and Jordan. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. It's finally summer. Everyone's going out with their cute dresses with beautiful designs on them. So you ask your friend, where'd you get that dress from? She says, H&M. But it's actually from West Bengal in India. Simultaneously, the craft and artisan sector represents one of the largest economies for rural women. Yet the reality is that they're earning less than 2% of the profits because where they're living, which are rural areas, is inaccessible to the markets. So at Roots Studio, we bridge these 2 problems and reclaim authorship through sustainable economics. We do this by digitizing the designs of these artists into an online library, which is subscription-based. And designers pay a fee to be able to see and license these designs for a season. Not only that, the voices and the stories of these artists are also licensable by these brands. The artists that are highly participating through this platform have already doubled their income. And we've worked with over 2,000 artists across 9 tribes in India, in southwestern China, and with refugee artists in Jordan. You'll see some of these designs the next year in Outdoor Research, Prana, Tommy Bahama, and even H&M. Rural women are often depicted too often as in devastation and in poverty. But through their creativity, their resilience, we believe that they are abundant and not scarce. Thank you.
Congratulations.
We're shifting gear here. Unemployment is high in rural communities in Kenya, particularly among women, which affects the health and welfare of entire families. Eggpreneur is a social enterprise that provides flexible yet stable income-generating opportunities to rural mothers with young children through small backyard poultry production. I'm very pleased to greet here Matt Dickinson, who's a Kenya native from Nairobi, who's been in this project for the last 3 years. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Matt Dixon. I'm the founder of Eggpreneur. Allow me to share the story of Eunice. Eunice is a single mother with 4 young children who are malnourished. Eunice represents 70% of women who are struggling every day with unemployment, poverty, and child malnutrition. The solution is simple. It's the power of an egg. Eggpreneur supports women with a basic poultry training session, connects them to be able to build up a chicken coops or chicken house, and gives them the first initial batch of their chicken to start their business, guaranteeing them the market for their product. Our vision is to empower women just like Eunice, who today she's having a source of income to be able to build micro businesses which alleviate families and communities out of poverty, one family at a time. Thank you.
India is home to the largest number of skilled handloom weavers and handicraft artisans in the world. While global demand for handicrafts and textiles is growing, the majority of these artisans live below the poverty line. Hear how Loomkata plans to help bolster traditional supply chains and connect these rural artisans to the global market. Arushi Chaudhuri Khanna is going to tell us all about it.
So, namaste. I'm Arushi, the founder of Loomkata. We look at empowering rural artisans to ensure that greater economic value of their end product is transferred directly back to them. Today, we are working with close to 100 artisans in 4 provinces of India, and count amongst our notable clients large organizations like Facebook, as well as small individual customers in metros of India. We are serving 100 artisans today and look to serve 500,000 by 2025. But beyond the numbers, I really wanted to use this platform to talk about what we set out to do. It was 2016. I was in the sweltering desert of Rajasthan with my very first training program for rural artisans. It was the end of the day. I was tired, exhausted, and really questioning what I was doing. And in that 47 degrees heat, I saw this lady come back. She had attended the program in the morning. She was coming back with her little tiffin box and about half of her village. She had come to give me dinner and to tell her village that this is my office. And the pride with which she pointed to that little shed where we were doing our workshop and said the word office brought home to me the sense of self-respect, independence, and pride that economic empowerment brings to women in rural India. That is, what guides me through everything I do, and I look forward to support from the larger community to take forward this mission. Thank you.
How inspiring is that? And I have to say, from the jury, it was such a difficult task selecting among the amazing projects that were submitted through this social enterprise pitch. Again, we want to convey to you how important it is to continue to source solutions everywhere that respond to local needs and that develop local entrepreneurship, ideas, and community engagement around sustainable models for development. And thank you again for your attention. I'd like to greet again our 3 winners, and a round of applause, please, for all their work.
This concludes our morning sessions. We ask all delegates to exit the plenary hall and please bring your belongings with you. Lunch will be served in the fueling station and in lunch sessions.